December 1st, 2018. 54-year-old electrical engineer Sarah Mitchell lay dying in the passenger seat of her own vehicle. 5 stab wounds pierced her chest. Blood pooled beneath her. Her husband gripped the steering wheel. Her stepdaughter sat frozen in the back. Within the hour, the entire nation would hear their story. A story that would make Oprah Winfrey warn millions of her followers to stop helping strangers. A story that would change how Americans thought about kindness. A story that wasn't true. This is the account of a woman who spent her life giving to others. A woman whose generosity defined her. A woman of deep faith who worked for the Department of Defense and raised 2 sons with the same values she embodied. On a cold Baltimore night, that generosity would allegedly cost her everything. Or would it? Because 3 months later, authorities arrested the storyteller 20 miles from the Mexican border. What really happened in that vehicle? Who was lying? And how did a tale of random street violence become one of the most calculated deceptions in modern criminal history? Stay with me, because what you think you know about this case, you don't.
Before we continue with this story, let us know where you are watching us from. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel.
November 30th, 2018. The American Legion Hall in East Baltimore. A birthday celebration, laughter, dancing, photographs capturing what appeared to be a perfect family evening. Keith Mitchell, 52 years old, married to Sarah just 4 years earlier. Tonight, he's celebrating his daughter Rachel's 28th birthday, alongside his wife. Sarah Mitchell, born on the 4th of July, 1964. A woman who loved music and poetry, who raised 2 sons to adulthood, who worked in classified engineering contracts at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Clearance level high, reputation impeccable. But her marriage fell apart. She raised the boys mostly alone, worked long hours, still found time for church activities, still stopped to help strangers. Her mother would later tell investigators Sarah couldn't help herself. If someone needed help, she helped. That's just who she was. In 2014, she met Keith Mitchell through their church community. He seemed devoted, attended services regularly, spoke about faith and family. He had a daughter, Rachel, from a previous relationship. The daughter lived nearby. Keith worked in security, not the glamorous kind, the overnight shifts, the buildings where nothing happened. He'd been married before, had some financial issues in his past, nothing Sarah could overlook, because Sarah saw potential in people. She believed in second chances. They quickly married. Sarah's sons weren't entirely comfortable with the speed, but their mother seemed happy. Keith moved into Sarah's home. She paid most of the bills. Her government salary made that possible. He talked about starting a business. She supported him. That's what you do for family. But by late 2018, something had shifted. Sarah had confided in her mother during a phone call. "I think I made a mistake." She didn't elaborate, just said she needed to think about things. Her mother asked if everything was okay with Keith. Sarah said, "I'll call you next week. We need to talk in person." That conversation never happened. On November 30th, Rachel was celebrating her birthday, late because everyone's schedules had been difficult to coordinate. The 3 of them met at the American Legion Hall around 9 p.m. They ordered food, had drinks. Rachel posted photos on social media. Everyone smiled for the camera. Keith and Sarah danced. Rachel recorded a video. Everything looked fine. At around 11:45 p.m., they left. Keith drove. Sarah is in the passenger seat. Rachel is in the back. The drive to Rachel's apartment should take about 15 minutes through East Baltimore. The streets were mostly empty, cold, early December. Christmas lights are beginning to appear in some windows. What happened in those next 15 minutes would determine everything. 12:32 a.m., December 1st, a 911 call. The operator answered. A man's voice, urgent. "My wife's been stabbed. She's bleeding. We need help." "Sir, where are you?" "I'm driving to Johns Hopkins Hospital. She needs help now." "What happened?" "We stopped to help someone, a woman with a baby. My wife gave her money. Then a man came up and stabbed her, multiple times. Please, she's dying." Keith Mitchell pulled into the emergency entrance of Johns Hopkins Hospital at 12:40 a.m. Medical staff rushed to the vehicle. Sarah was barely conscious. Blood saturated her clothes. 5 stab wounds to her torso. 1 cut across her right arm. The wounds were deep, precise, catastrophic. They got her onto a gurney, rushed her inside, began emergency procedures, but her injuries were too severe, the damage too extensive. At 12:58 a.m., doctors pronounced Sarah Mitchell dead. Keith sat in the waiting area. Rachel is beside him. Both appeared to be in shock. When detectives arrived 20 minutes later, Keith gave his statement. They'd been driving from the Legion Hall to Rachel's apartment. The route should have been straightforward, but then on Valley Street in East Baltimore, they saw a woman. She was holding what looked like a baby. She had a sign, something about needing help to feed her child. Sarah immediately asked Keith to stop. He did. Sarah rolled down her window, reached into her purse, pulled out $10, extended it toward the woman. That's when a man appeared from the shadows, late 20s or early 30s, Keith said, goatee, dark clothing. He thanked Sarah for the money. Then, without warning, he lunged through the window, stabbed her, again and again, grabbed her necklace. The woman with the baby reached in and took Sarah's wallet. Keith said he tried to fight the man off but couldn't reach him. The attacker fled. The woman disappeared. Keith drove straight to the hospital. The entire attack lasted maybe 30 seconds. Rachel confirmed every detail. She'd seen it from the back seat. The woman with the baby, the man with the knife, the sudden violence. Everything happened so fast. Detectives took notes, asked about the exact location. Valley Street, Keith said, the 1000 block, near Rachel's apartment. They'd just been trying to help someone in need. Within hours, the story hit the local news. By morning, it was national. By afternoon, it was international. The headlines wrote themselves. Good Samaritan killed by panhandlers. Woman's kindness costs her life. Baltimore engineer murdered after giving money to homeless. Oprah Winfrey tweeted to her millions of followers, "This story stopped me cold. I've helped strangers 1,000 times. Will think twice now." The narrative solidified. Random street violence, wrong place, wrong time. A generous woman was killed for $10. Baltimore's crime problem is exemplified in one horrific moment. But 3 detectives assigned to the case weren't satisfied. Because when they went to Valley Street to examine the crime scene, they found something troubling. Nothing. They found absolutely nothing. Detective Marcus Webb had worked Baltimore homicide for 17 years. He'd seen hundreds of crime scenes. Stabbings left evidence, blood on pavement, witnesses from nearby homes, security cameras, something. Valley Street, 1000 block? He arrived at 6 a.m., just as the sun rose, walked the entire area, knocked on every door. Most houses were vacant. The few occupied homes held people who'd heard nothing, seen nothing. The street wasn't well traveled, definitely not a place where panhandlers typically operated. Panhandlers work high-traffic areas, Detective Webb told his partner. Bus stops, store entrances. Why would someone stand here with a baby at midnight? No blood on the street, no witnesses, no physical evidence whatsoever. Detective Webb's partner, Sarah Chen, examined the vehicle at police headquarters, Keith Mitchell's 2012 Audi. They processed it completely. Fingerprints on the exterior passenger side matched Keith Mitchell. Inside, they found 2 pairs of gloves, black ones on the center console, yellow rubber gloves in the back seat, and a broken acrylic fingernail in the seat, matched Rachel's manicure. But no unidentified fingerprints, no DNA from unknown persons, nothing suggesting anyone else had been in or near that vehicle. They brought Keith back for a second interview, asked him to show them the exact route he'd driven that night. He agreed, drove them from the American Legion Hall toward Rachel's apartment, pointed out Valley Street. Right here, this is where we stopped. Except the vehicle's GPS told a different story, and so did cell phone tower data. Keith's phone, Rachel's phone, Sarah's phone, all 3 pinged off a tower near Druid Hill Park, a large urban park about 2 miles from where Keith claimed they'd stopped. The phones remained stationary in that location for approximately 15 minutes between 11:55 p.m. and 12:10 a.m. When detectives asked Keith about Druid Hill Park, he paused, then said he'd gotten lost driving, made a wrong turn, ended up in the park briefly, but didn't mention anyone stopping there, didn't explain why they'd been stationary for 15 minutes. "Why didn't you mention this before?" Detective Chan asked. "I forgot. I was focused on getting to the hospital. I wasn't thinking about wrong turns." His story changed 3 times across multiple interviews. First, they went straight from the Legion Hall to Valley Street. Then, they might have taken a longer route. Then, he'd gotten lost near the park. Rachel's story stayed identical to Keith's every time, word for word, as if rehearsed. Meanwhile, the Baltimore homeless outreach team searched for the suspects Keith described, a woman with a baby, a man in his 30s with a goatee. They knew every regular panhandler in the city, showed photos to hundreds of people. Nobody matched the description. Nobody had been working Valley Street that night. Nobody had heard anything about the incident. Detectives obtained Keith's financial records. Sarah had been the primary earner. Keith had debt, credit cards, past bankruptcies. Sarah had life insurance through her government job, $150,000. Beneficiary, Keith Mitchell. But here's what made investigators focus completely on Keith. Surveillance footage from businesses near the American Legion Hall showed them leaving at 11:43 p.m. Footage from cameras on the route to Rachel's apartment showed the Audi driving past at 11:49 p.m. But then the vehicle disappeared from cameras for 17 minutes. The hospital security footage showed Keith pulling up at 12:42 a.m., not 12:30 as he'd claimed. 13 minutes.
The Interrogation Room. March 8, 2019, 3 months after Sarah Mitchell's death. Rachel Mitchell sat across from prosecutors. Her attorney was beside her. She looked exhausted. "Tell us what really happened," the prosecutor said. Rachel started crying. Then she started talking. They'd left the Legion Hall around 11:45 p.m., but they didn't drive straight to her apartment. Keith turned toward Druid Hill Park. Sarah asked why. Keith said he wanted to show Rachel something, a spot he'd found during daytime walks, a place with a good view of the city. Sarah was tired. She'd been drinking. She dozed off in the passenger seat as they drove into the park. Keith drove deep into the wooded area, away from the main roads, away from cameras, into darkness. He stopped the car. Rachel thought they were just looking at the view, but then Keith reached under his seat, pulled out a knife, a large kitchen knife. Before Rachel could process what was happening, Keith stabbed his sleeping wife. Sarah woke up, screamed, fought. Keith stabbed her again and again. Rachel sat frozen in the back seat, watching her father murder his wife. 5 stab wounds. Sarah stopped fighting, stopped screaming, slumped in her seat. Keith sat there for a moment, calm. Then he turned to Rachel. "You're going to help me. We're going to tell them it was panhandlers." Rachel was terrified, high, in shock. She said, "Okay."
Keith drove from the park to Valley Street, stopped briefly, created the illusion they'd been there, then drove to the hospital, coached Rachel on the story during the drive, made her repeat it back to him. A woman with a baby, a man with a knife, Valley Street, random attack. At the hospital, they performed grief, called family, spoke to the police, repeated the story. Keith even cried during the interviews. The next day, Keith told Rachel they needed to get their story straight, went over every detail, made sure they matched. Then they appeared on television, warned Baltimore residents about the dangers of helping strangers. The performance was flawless. But Rachel couldn't live with it. She started using drugs more heavily, tried to forget what she'd seen, what she'd helped cover up. When Keith suggested they leave the country, she went along with it, thought maybe running would be easier than confessing. Now, sitting in that interrogation room, she finally told the truth. My father killed Sarah. I watched him do it. I helped him lie about it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Prosecutors offered her a deal. Plead guilty to accessory after the fact, testify against Keith, face up to 10 years instead of life. She took it. Because Rachel Mitchell had been manipulated by her father, used as a witness to legitimize his story, coerced into fleeing the country, but she wasn't the killer. Keith Mitchell was.
December 9th, 2021, nearly 3 years after Sarah Mitchell's death, a Baltimore courtroom. Keith Mitchell's trial. Rachel Mitchell took the stand, testified against her father, described watching him murder his wife in Druid Hill Park, described his calmness afterward, described the rehearsed story, the coached lies, the attempt to flee to Mexico. Keith's defense attorney attacked her credibility, called her a drug addict, said she'd lie to save herself, said she was the real killer trying to blame her father. But prosecutors had more than Rachel's testimony. They had cell phone data placing Keith's phone in Druid Hill Park for 15 minutes, exactly when Rachel said the murder occurred. They had surveillance footage showing Keith's inconsistent timeline, the missing minutes, the late arrival at the hospital. They had Keith's browser history, his research into life insurance, his search for countries without extradition. They had the brother's testimony, Keith asking about someone who could take care of a problem weeks before Sarah's death. They had financial records showing Keith's debt, Sarah's life insurance, the clear motive. They had the complete absence of evidence supporting the panhandler story. No witnesses, no suspects, no physical evidence, nothing. The FBI had even brought in behavioral analysts, reviewed the television interviews Keith gave the day after the murder, the micro-expressions, the rehearsed quality of his statements, the way he touched his face when describing the attack. Classic signs of deception. On December 9th, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty, first-degree murder, use of a deadly weapon with intent to injure. Keith Mitchell showed no emotion, just stared straight ahead. Sarah's mother stood outside the courthouse afterward, told reporters she'd known from the beginning. The story made no sense. I knew it was him. A mother knows, but nobody listened until the evidence couldn't be ignored. Sarah's sons released a statement. Our mother was the most generous person we knew. She helped everyone. She loved everyone. And the person she trusted most murdered her for money. We'll never understand it. But here's the part that haunts everyone who followed this case. Keith Mitchell almost succeeded. His story was perfect. The vulnerable victims, the random street violence, the national outrage. It played into every fear people have about urban crime, about homelessness, about the risks of kindness. Millions believed him. Oprah believed him. The police initially believed him. The entire narrative fit so well that even investigators struggled to see past it.
And if Keith had just stayed in Baltimore instead of fleeing to Mexico, if he'd just waited out the investigation, if he'd just maintained the performance, would he have been caught? Because the evidence that convicted him came from his own panic, his flight, his attempt to cross the border, his communications with Rachel that showed consciousness of guilt. The murder itself was brutal, but not complicated. Sarah never saw it coming, asleep in her own car, killed by the man she'd married, the man she'd supported financially and emotionally, the man who saw her not as a person, but a life insurance payout. Keith Mitchell stabbed his wife 5 times, made his daughter watch, created an elaborate lie, fooled the nation, and nearly got away with it. On February 28, 2022, Judge Jennifer Schiffer sentenced Keith Mitchell to life in prison, plus 3 years for the weapons charge. She addressed Keith directly. You murdered your defenseless wife while she slept. Then you blamed vulnerable people, panhandlers who couldn't defend themselves. You exploited this city's reputation. You manipulated your own daughter. You showed no remorse. The maximum sentence exists for crimes exactly like this. Rachel Mitchell received 5 years plus 3 years probation. She's eligible for parole. She's in a treatment program for addiction. She'll live with what she witnessed and what she helped conceal for the rest of her life.
Think about how this case changed the narrative around kindness. How one man's lie made millions of people reconsider helping strangers. How Baltimore's homeless population became suspect overnight. How a calculated murder became a national conversation about urban violence and personal safety. Keith Mitchell weaponized our fears. He knew exactly what story would work, what would generate sympathy, what would deflect suspicion, and it worked, until it didn't. Sarah Mitchell spent her life helping people. Her final act, according to the lie her husband told, was trying to help a woman with a baby. Even the fabricated version of her death reflected who she actually was, someone who couldn't walk past suffering without stopping. The question this case leaves us with isn't just about guilt or innocence. It's about the stories we choose to believe, the narratives that feel true because they confirm what we already fear, the ease with which a well-constructed lie can replace reality. What do you think? Could you have spotted the deception? Would you have believed Keith Mitchell's story? How do we balance healthy skepticism with continuing to help those in need? Leave your thoughts in the comments. This case deserves conversation, discussion, reflection. If you found this investigation compelling, subscribe for more deep examinations of cases where nothing is as it seems, where the truth hides behind carefully constructed lies, where justice takes years but eventually arrives. Next time, we'll examine a case that makes this one look simple. A woman who didn't just create one false identity, she created 17 and used each one to destroy lives. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, the most dangerous lies aren't the obvious ones. They're the ones that feel true, the ones that confirm what we want to believe, the ones told by people who seem trustworthy, the ones that take years to unravel. Keith Mitchell understood that, and he almost got away with murder because of it. Thanks for watching. Stay skeptical, stay thoughtful, and never stop questioning the stories that feel too perfect to be false, because sometimes they are.